It's September 8th, 2021, and we're getting ready for Worlds and checking in on Proving Grounds with the LCS's Emily Rand. This is the True Sight Podcast. Welcome to the True Sight Podcast by Oracle's Elixir, your source for in-depth analytical coverage of professional League of Legends and the rest of the esports world. I'm Tim Magic Sevenhusen, and today we have Emily Rand joining me once again. It's been a couple of months, but you're back, Emily. Welcome back.
Oh, thank you.
How have you been making use of the time since the LCS wrapped up?
I've been obviously watching Proving Grounds. I've been spamming TFT, as we were talking about before. I've also been playing more League of Legends, because in season, I actually have a lot less time to game outside of playing a few games to make sure I know, like, itemization and just, you know, how things work from patch to patch. So that's been really fun. And yeah. I've been writing some stuff that I'll hopefully release soon.
Just for yourself or for LoL Esports or?
Oh, no, for myself. Like, I've been working on this score article for forever, and I haven't had time to, like, actually dedicate to it in the year. And then I wanted to do a post-mortem on my first season with LCS and just what I learned and stuff like that. So,
you give us any kind of a teaser, or you don't want to ruin it?
I mean, that's pretty much it. Sorry, I'm really boring, and I'm very bad at, like, hyping it up. Like, it's literally just going to be me going through the entire year of LCS and what I learned and what I think I can improve on and stuff like that.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to that. What's your go-to comp in TFT right now?
So we were talking about Jax comps. I've run some Knight comps. I'm trying to think. The other day I, like, rolled into this really weird Mystic Skirmisher comp because I had a Skirmisher emblem and I was able to put it on Gwen, and she just, like, absolutely popped off because I ended up for some reason rolling into, like, an early Gwen. So that was really fun, but I don't think that can become a staple.
Yeah, that's not sustainable.
Lucky.
Yeah, I've definitely been playing a lot of Jax. I like a little bit of slow roll Vayne just because I've always enjoyed Vayne in a lot of the earlier sets too. I just find it a fun build. And then you go for the Vel'Koz now and then. But
I enjoy playing Vayne in League of Legends.
Ooh. Sometimes I wonder.
I'm one of those people.
Yeah. Sometimes I wonder what would be the worst fit to take, like, a TFT item and champion combo and put it into League, and, like, just doesn't work at all. But yeah, I think the Vayne builds are kind of okay. Anyways, that's not really what we're here for. We're here to talk about some other things, some of which you've already mentioned. But let's start off with the biggest topic, I think, which is just Worlds, obviously coming up pretty soon. And I think for me personally, it's been a little bit hard to get hyped so far about Worlds, just because we haven't had the groups draw yet. You know, the song hasn't come out, all that stuff that I think marks kind of milestones along the way. But it's slowly starting to build. The excitement's getting there, and, you know, of course, once those things do drop, it's really going to blow up, I think. Where are your hype levels at?
I'm actually really excited, but this is going to sound terrible. I'm sorry, Riot, but I don't really care about, like, the songs and, like, the hype build up. I do think group draw is always interesting because groups have... I can't stress enough how much of an impact groups actually have over the way that the tournament plays out. Like, it's group draw, and then it's also the way that the meta changes over the course of the Worlds patch for teams. So those are, like, the two main things I think are actually so important in determining who does end up making it through to the finals. So for example, like, I think Suning is a really interesting case from last year, because they were not the Chinese team that I expected to perform well. Like, when we saw the Worlds meta, I actually thought it was going to be JDG.
Yeah.
Because I thought it suited their style the best. Like, sure, TES were the better team. They had the better hands, but they did this year too. You know, they would just draft things that they would think would be entirely OP without paying attention to the comp or they would just expect that they would always be able to smash you and out team fight you, and that was not the case. So that's where I think like Suning was really interesting because they fit the meta super well, and Bin was able to grow a lot as a player while really committing to the play style we saw from him in the regular season, which we kind of called like the duality of Bin, where he'll either int or just like absolutely take over a game. So I mean, a lot of Chinese top laners I think are like that, but he in particular would like contest the wave really early, to the point of like other top laners would be like, why are you like contesting before the wave's even here at level 1? Like, what are you actually doing? Because that's not always a good idea, because you can end up inting your entire wave if you do that. So anyway, that's a tangent, but I think that group draw and like how people adjust to the meta are the two most important things. So I'm really curious to see how groups end up shaking out, because I think due to the fact that there is a 4 seed from both China and South Korea in the actual play-in stage, this Worlds in particular, given the strength of Mad Lions and Fnatic, given even like I would argue the strength of the North American teams, and then obviously the overwhelming strength of LPL, and then to a slightly lesser extent LCK, this is going to be like an insanely competitive event. And a lot of the teams that are going have dramatically different play styles. So that's always like if you want to get me personally hyped up about an event, that's all you have to say is like let's see how this plays out, because that is really interesting to me. Obviously, that's not something you can like slap in a tweet and then send out and get people hyped. So I'm like the worst hype person anyway. So but I like myself am incredibly excited about this year's World Championship, and I know that having to move away from holding it in China has really kind of thrown a wrench in everything. So I just hope that they can, manage to pull off like a really, really good event, because this is under like a significant time crunch in terms of how short the turnaround time is that they're going to have to pull this off.
Yeah, for sure. I think doing it like, I don't think it's in the same exact, well, they still haven't actually officially announced yet, right? But like same exact venue and stuff as before. But having had some experience of what to do with kind of a small space and no audience and all that kind of stuff, I think they've done some cool stuff before. Hopefully they didn't use up all their ideas last time for how to make that cool. But they've got some of that tech involved and that kind of stuff that I think it'll make for a good viewing experience one way or another. I think, like you're saying, the fact that it is setting up to be a really close tournament with a lot of viable teams and I think a lot of close levels and a lot from what we can kind of estimate going in. Do you think there are clear favorites like there sometimes have been before? Like last year, I think people were all back and forth on Top versus Damwon, who's the favorite there, JDG, like those top 3, or other times there's been a very clear number 1 favorite. Is it a little more compressed this time at the top end, or do you think there are still kind of 2 or 3 clear favorites?
I think obviously people are going to look at EDG and FPX both, and then Damwon, and then maybe even sneak Mad Lions in there, depending on how like hopeful you are about that team. But I think the big thing for me at this tournament is, again, because there are so many teams with like dramatically different playstyles. Like even looking at EDG versus FPX, right? I did not expect Edward Gaming to win that series. I assume that most people didn't, given how well FPX have been performing, given the fact that this has actually been a career year for Doinby, in my opinion. I think he's playing better than he did in 2019, which is when he won the World Championship. So I think that you look at the way FPX play, and it's the kind of like what you'd consider like the classic Doinby style team. And then you look at the way that EDG play, and they typically play through like really, really strong lanes, because I do think they're, one of their, I guess, weakest components is jungle and then Flandra in the top lane, compared to, you know, his previous iterations as a player. This is actually probably his most down year individually, but it was cool to see him make it. And EDG really, really heavily relies on like having insanely strong lanes and specifically being able to play to the bot side of the map with Viper. And then Scout is just like, I feel like people might be underrating him a little bit as a mid going into this tournament, but like he is an insane laner, like just absolutely insane laner. Like if you're looking at just raw laning mechanics, you look at him and you look at Chovy, who I also like I did not expect to see at Worlds, to be quite honest. I don't even know what to make of HLE being here, but even looking at these two teams, right? Sorry, I keep like getting distracted and tangents and interrupting myself. Looking at these two teams, they have like dramatically different play styles, but they're two incredibly strong teams. So whichever one does better at this tournament is going to depend on how the meta ends up shaking out, in my opinion.
Well, and meta could definitely influence things a lot. And I think, you know, we're seeing it seems like every year Riot comes out with some new, like, we have a different philosophy for Worlds balance this year. And this year it's like the two stage patch, like I think 11-17 they're saying was kind of the pre-Worlds patch, and then 11-18 is the actual Worlds patch. So they're bringing in kind of a more moderate set of changes for the 0.17, and then like small tweaks just to fix any outliers for 18 is the way I've kind of like interpreted what they've said. And so I think all we've seen on 11-17 so far is Proving Grounds, I think, right? Like, I guess you Masters playing on 17?
I don't know, actually, because I have not watched enough of it. Please don't yell at me, people, but I'm going to check now. Because, I have watched Proving Grounds, and that is on 11-17.
Yeah, and there's a few things happening there. A little bit of Galio mid, a little bit of Kindred coming back. I'm trying to think of what else, like, other than just individual picks, which can always just come down to the players, right? Not necessarily the meta, but, you know, we've seen a Shen from Gamsu. So, I mean, it's interesting to try to speculate.
EU Masters has been on 11-16. Okay. The Galio mid is something that, I mean, obviously Doinb is going to play that if it's at all viable, but it is something that LPL teams have been looking at too. Yeah. So you have that coming into the meta for them, especially for a team like FBX.
Yeah. But I think it's something that, you know, the mid lane meta is a pretty influential around like mid and jungle. Like, where are you going to be playing the jungle into the lanes mostly? Are you going to be playing the Galio or other kinds of mids that are there to kind of back up the jungler? You know, strong lane winning champions that can affect a lot, especially like a Chovy team, a lot either direction, or a Doinb team who's going to play different ways. I assume I haven't really watched either of them super closely this year yet. I'm still working on kind of my catch up on VODs for the other regions, but that can definitely have a huge influence over how different teams perform. And playing stage ends up being a really cool part to see some of that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, like, the other thing is if the schedule that was released is correct. I actually don't know. Like, I'm so not in the know. Yeah. So anything I say here that I'm speculating, like, I'm actually speculating. I didn't even know they're moving it from China to Europe until it was announced, until the news broke. Yeah. But I saw Ashley and Corizon released it, the like suspected schedule. I think it was a leak. It wasn't officially announced or anything. But that schedule, if that is correct, is so condensed. Like play-in stage is so quick. And so that means that whatever team does quote unquote figure out the meta first in that stage. And we've also seen like scrims have such a huge impact on how you learn the world's meta. And with such a assuming that schedule is correct, with such a condensed schedule, it's going to be really interesting to see who people's scrim partners are and what they learn, because that's always something that is really funny to go back and look at previous worlds where you can tell, like, oh, you know, like, for example, in 2018, like RNG sure were scrimming Flash Wolves a lot, and they both had a very terrible read on the meta. So yeah, and wow, I just realized I haven't even mentioned RNG in this, but they're another team that has like the potential to figure stuff out and be able to do really well. So yeah, It's going to be really interesting only because with such a condensed schedule, especially with such a condensed play-in stage, which is something that I feel like you said everyone looks at to see how teams initially are looking at the meta. And there's always one team that has a really great read on it. And there's always another team that has like just a really awful, like a really, really terrible read on it. And so it's going to be up to teams to see what they can take away from that really condensed stage going into the main stage. And whoever, you know, if you're assuming that the major region teams are making it out of play-ins, it's going to be really tricky for them too to see how well they figure out the meta.
Well, and we also tend to see that the meta from the play-in stage into the main group stage tends to shift a fair amount, right? Like a bunch of people in the play-in stage are playing a certain way, and then suddenly the rest of the teams come in, and it's like, so we thought you got this part of it right, but actually the main bulk is over here, and then you see a big jump, right? So you know, sometimes there is that shift as well, and maybe that's also from different like scrim pockets because the teams in the play-in stage are getting fewer scrims against the teams in the main stage or whatever that's going to be. Just different levels of teams, right? So, yeah, I mean, it can be really interesting, but I think that group draw is you know, setting up which of those teams are going to match up against each other and have their play styles go up against one another, and that's something that I'm trying to think back. I should have looked up beforehand when that happened last year or the year before, because I kind of feel like it should have happened by now, but I guess we still have 2.5 weeks or so, something like that. So
yeah, like three weeks, right? It's rumored to start on the 4th.
Okay.
5th. Let me see.
Yeah.
Check.
I don't know. It's
Horizon
3
Twitter.
or 3.5 weeks. Okay.
Because that is literally where I'm getting, or someone in chat knows what the rumor is.
Yeah. Apparently the draw was a week or 2 weeks from now in the past few years. So maybe I'm just like impatient, and that's all it is. But
you just want that group draw.
We'll get there. That's when things really start to me. That's the signal. Like, ooh, now we know who these teams are going to be playing against, and all that kind of stuff. But of course, it's all going to kick off with the play-ins. And I'm curious whether you're worried at all about Cloud9 making it out of the playoffs or out of the play-ins. Like you said, you know, if we assume the major region teams make it through, but we can't always assume these things. I mean, not all the academy teams are in proving grounds. I think it's a pretty similar kind of a thing. Like, you know, it can happen. You can follow it in play-ins. So, what do you think? Is there much risk there?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think there is. You know, we talked about C9 going into MSI, and we're like, this is a team that can really learn and evolve. And I actually don't think that's changed given the players. There's, you know, still on this lineup. It's the same roster. However, you have a lot of really strong teams in this play-in stage. Like, so you have like I actually, looking at the minor region teams, I'm weirdly the most curious about Beyond Gaming, who's the second seed from PCS, who actually unexpectedly upset PSG Talon in the PCS bracket. And then they met each other again in like the grand final. So they basically upset them in the upper half of the bracket, and then lost to them in the finals, which is why they're the second seed. But this is Doggo's team, so if you were at all a fan of Doggo and his individual performance, he's going to be with his original team going in, so they're really interesting. And then I also think, weirdly enough, not a meme, but I'm curious to see what Detonation Focus Me do, because I will say this up front, I have not had time to review their VODs yet. I'm actually going to do it tomorrow. I have like an entire day set aside to focus on, like, I'm going to be focusing on one region per day. But if you remember, they had Kazu, their coach, and he was a former support player, but he had retired and become a coach, playing at MSI because they were waiting for, I believe they were waiting for Steel to get his residency. So then they could play Kang in the bot lane as their support. And so you have, you know, this is kind of like hot upstart mid laner in Arya. You have Evie, who I think has been actually, no joke, a really good top laner for a really long time. And it just so happens that he is in the LJL, so like not a lot of people look at him, but I think this guy is like legitimately good, which is why I even highlighted him on the MSI broadcast in terms of how he contests the wave and how he plays top lane just generally. But this team is really interesting to me because we were looking at them and how well they played in MSI compared to expectations of a team coming out of the LJL, right? And the piece they were missing was King, who is a better support than Kazu. And Kazu had just stepped in because he was like a stopgap.
Yeah.
And so I'm very curious to see how this team does. And again, I am saying this without any sort of confidence in my analysis other than what I saw from them as MSI, because I honestly have not had time to go back and look at their performance in the LJL regular season. So someone in chat can please correct me if they have watched them and they're like, oh, they're going to be really bad. But that to me is really interesting because I saw flashes of a team that really understands certain things better than a lot of other minor region teams. And then obviously, again, I just think Evie individually is very good.
Yeah, I think I agree. I was really impressed with what they did at MSI and you know, not just the results, but how they got there, which is a big part of it. But I think there should be a fair amount of confidence. You know, there's always that risk that the major region teams can drop out and lose games. I mean, it got pretty close at Worlds last year to even more drama than there was. And I don't know. It seems like the minor region teams keep stepping up year over year. Not every single one, but like as a whole, it's getting more and more tightly contested. So I think that part of the tournament, I really like the change they made where they brought it into the flow of the event a little more, and I think made it feel like more of actual Worlds. It's not like here's the little side pre-Worlds thing and now Worlds starts. And the fact that they've kind of incorporated it more directly is really good, and I think and really positive. So. Yeah, I'm excited about that. I'm curious if you think a little bit of a different angle on it. I've seen the idea before that going through play-ins can be beneficial to teams somehow. You know, we've seen the Cloud9 run coming through play-ins and then making it. I believe that was the year they made it to semis, right? And you know, there's some rationale that could make sense that you get kind of that extra stage time. You get to test out the things. You're not just putting it all in scrims and then only got, you know, a few games to actually find out whether you're right or not. You have a more of a chance to kind of course correct. Do you think going through play-ins could be an advantage for the teams that are there?
Yes. So I think it depends on what kind of team you are, because, for example, do I think like if Detonation Focus Me end up upsetting and getting through, do I think going through play-ins will help them like quote unquote perform better on the main stage? Probably not, just because there's still kind of a skill gap and an understanding of the game that isn't going to match up to, you know, just because, again, like you have a team coming from a minor region, you're just not going to get as much practice against the mistakes that you're making they're just not going to be exploited. So like some of them will be exploited in play-in, but if you are a minor region team and you end up making it to main stage, I don't think it's going to be much of a benefit. But for a major region team who should already have a lot of the fundamentals down, more so than minor region teams, because they are going to get punished for it a lot more in their own regions, I think that it can be a huge benefit if you are the type of team that can learn really quickly, that can adjust and adapt and not have to worry about like the skill of your individual players, if that makes sense. So like, I know talking to, at 2018 specifically, I talked to both Cloud9 and G2 going into semifinals and then after their semifinals. And, you know, players and coaches from both teams said that going through the play-in stage, because if you remember, EDG were in that in the play-in stage, and G2 were also in that play-in stage. Everyone remembers C9, especially since they like almost lost to Gambit in their like best of 5, right? But I think that, you know, people kind of tend to forget that G2 was also there as well. And the way that G2 ended up playing around their solo laners, similarly to how IG ended up approaching the meta, was a very good and like, I don't want to say correct, but that became the meta of what that tournament ultimately ended up being. So, and they both said like it was great because we got to try stuff out. We weren't super worried that we were going to be eliminated. And so I think that if you have that mindset and you, again, don't have to worry about like the individual skill of your players versus the individual skill of other players, I think that play-ins can be insanely beneficial. I also think it can be a negative, right? Because you are operating under the assumption, if you're a major region team, that like, quote unquote, you're going to make it, right? Like, so looking at a team like LNG or Hanwha Life, who again, the latter of which I did not expect to see here whatsoever. LNG is like kind of a surprise, but I thought it was probably going to be WE, but like given their performance through playoffs and through regionals, it does make sense. But Hanwha Life came out of nowhere for me, based on their performance in the regular season. So, but if you're one of those teams, you are already, I guess, operating under the assumption that you're going to make it out. And so you can't pull something like an LGD from last year where, this team just came on the stage and looked absolutely awful, like really out of sync, really poorly coordinated, which was a bit odd considering that certain parts of the meta, I think, did suit them. Because of how they played mid jungle was different. That ended up being the kind of deciding factor and why they looked so bad, in my opinion. But that then puts like so much more pressure on you as a team, right? Because as soon as LGD like lost their first game in play-ins, everyone's looking at them. They're like, "You're not looking so good," and then they continue to look really bad, and people were wondering if they'd even make it out. Mad Lions, similarly, I think they have talked about this themselves, about how because they were such a young team, like the pressure kind of did get to them. Like I know they've done interviews, I'm paraphrasing, but they've actually talked about this as well. And that was a massive motivation coming into this year with the same like core of that team. And they've really like blossomed into an incredibly formidable team. But it was a year later, right? Because they didn't make it out of play-ins. So I think ultimately it's I don't want to say a double-edged sword necessarily because it's not that dramatic, but you do have to be operating under the assumption that your team is automatically good enough to go out to exit play-in stage like fairly gracefully into the main stage. And in that way, it can be really good to cut your teeth and try to figure out how your team is going to play as the meta evolves.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's always fascinating to see not only which major region teams maybe come in and either just don't look good or look like they might not be tryharding as much as they could, like maybe they're being a little too experimental or something like that, that gives that it only needs, I think at this point, a relatively slight edge for some of these minor region teams to kind of take that and actually beat you. And you're like, wait a second. We thought we were spotting them like a 10% advantage and that's all they needed apparently, just to test yourself. So I think that, it makes it really fascinating. Speaking about kind of the play styles and the mentalities that teams bring in, I think we've talked about that a little bit with the different meta reads different teams have or the ways they like to play. I think one of the topics this year, especially towards the end of summer in the LCS, has been the different approaches to the game, the different play styles, the very melodramatic Peter Dunn, battle for the soul of the LCS kind of thing.
I love Peter so much.
He's not afraid to mix it up a little bit. I'm curious what you think about what the LCS teams are bringing, especially as we saw right at the end of playoffs. I think from my perspective, things shifted up a little bit. And one of the things that I really praised 100 Thieves for in winning was that they seemed like they had increased the pace of their play and not defaulted into that scaling team fight kind of an approach. I'm not sure if you agree with that take on 100 Thieves, but overall, for all three teams, do you think they're bringing kind of the right kind of play style to succeed at Worlds? And maybe it's more of an individual team, case-by-case thing.
For 100 Thieves, the thing that impressed me the most about their playoff run was actually their preparation in going up against every single team they faced. They kind of adjusted their strategy, but also looked at known counters and play styles from other regions. This isn't even me presuming based on their play. It's also something that their coaching staff has come out and said as well. But I compare them a bit to like an LNG, not necessarily in terms of play style, although obviously they're both kind of playing around these carry jungle performances. I think Tarzan plays differently than Closer. Yeah. And not even just on individual level. I'm talking about like the team itself. They play differently with their teams. But the reason why I'm comparing them to LNG is because LNG was also a team that, again, I didn't initially expect to see here, but their playoff run was owed a lot to their preparation as a team. And like, even if I disagreed very strongly with their drafting, which I did, you should not be second picking Vayne into Ziggs. I'm sorry. I don't care how good of a counter you think it is. You should also not be picking Zach into Olaf. I'm just saying. But regardless of whether I disagreed, they seem to have this really strong identity and play style. Like, they knew what they wanted to play. They had counters that they thought very highly of, prepared to go up against what their opponents were going to play. And I think you can see a very similar approach to the way that 100 Thieves looked at their opponents in the playoff bracket, where I think you look at a team like Team Liquid, and I think Team Liquid did a lot of internal soul searching from their last week 9 game, which was that terrible scaling draft where Jensen got super far ahead on Azir and like they still couldn't win because C9 was just gonna absolutely destroy them at a certain point. And they adjusted. They ended up playing Ziggs. They ended up playing a lot more for early mid game. And they were looking at it like as an internal play style, whereas a team like LNG or 100 Thieves were not necessarily not focusing on themselves, but looking at the way they're preparing for opponents, right? And they're preparing counter picks and all this other stuff. So in terms of like North American teams, I think the 3 teams that we're sending are all incredibly different in terms of play style, which gives you a better chance of pushing a team to get further in the bracket. Because if you, as a region, are sending, again, like 3 teams with 3 different play styles, you see that also from Europe. You see that in the teams that both LPL and LCK sent, where every single team has a pretty different and sometimes dramatically different look at how the game is played. And so that's where I think like I'm the most like hesitant about Cloud9 specifically, because I know that the way this team can play, and I know that they actually can play around Blabber as like a significant carry threat because we've seen it previously. But they just never really came together in a way that made me super confident in them. Now, the flip side to that is that, again, we always think of C9 like the potential of the team, the individuals on the team, the fact that they have the coaching staff to be able to figure out a good meta read and adjust their players to that. So they have all of the components to do well. I just didn't see enough of it in playoffs to have like a ton of confidence in them. That being said, again, this world is incredibly tough. So if you're asking me how well are North America going to do, or how well are North American teams going to do, it could be entirely possible that we are sending 3 like comparatively strong teams to previous years where they're going to look a lot better in single games or series, and they're still going to lose. Like, they're still not going to advance to the point where we would quote unquote want them to be because, again, of the accelerated schedule, because North America as a region is worse top to bottom than the other 3 major regions. You do have to the learning curve is a lot steeper for North American teams when they enter scrims going into Worlds. However, again, like it could be entirely possible that we see them perform the best in actual games that North America has performed in a while, actually, I think. And if they don't advance, I'll be really sad because I feel like people's takeaway is going to be, NA sucks, again, rather than like, why don't we actually look at the games and analyze like what they're doing, because this was actually really good. So I'll be kind of sad if that happens, because I mean, it happens all the time at League of Legends. Fandom is incredibly tied to results rather than what actually
win-loss
happens.
Results, right?
Yeah. So, but like, I mean, what you're asking is like, do you think it's good that the teams that we're sending have a variety of different play styles? And yes, I think that's actually how you get, like, if you are someone who's cheering for a region rather than a specific team, you want all of the teams that are representing your region to be incredibly different, because the chances that one of them will be able to adapt to whatever the world's meta ends up being is a lot higher.
Yeah, definitely. I think I definitely agree on, especially on that idea of like separating the level of performance from the actual wins and losses, because obviously at the end of the day, if you lose, that's all that really matters, and it doesn't really matter how close you were, but it does determine a bit of a trend into the future, right? And whether we come out of this Worlds with how do we fix NA flood on Reddit again, like every other year, or whether it's or whether it's like, hey, we're getting there, right? Like we took another step in the right direction. I think in the late 20-teens, anywhere from like the 2015 to 18 range, or maybe a couple of years before that, obviously the conversation was always, the gap between Korea and the rest of the world, and is it closing or not? And so many people, I think it's a very similar kind of a thing, where so many people would say, no, it's not closing. Korea's going to dominate forever and nobody can come anywhere near, because Korea just kept winning Worlds over and over again. But I think I was one of the people out there saying, hey, no, it was closing, because before it was a convincing 3-0, then it was a slightly shaky 3-0, and it's a little different, right? And then it's a convincing 3-1. And these, if you're just going to look at straight results, I'm being a little bit facetious with that, but the way the games played out kept feeling a little bit closer, and then suddenly it wasn't, the gap was gone. And I think I've been seeing that for a couple of years now, where, and maybe it's a little bit of just trying to convince myself to feel better about NA, but I think there's some truth to it, that the ways that certain teams are starting to approach things, and the levels that the players are performing at, and some of that have felt like the gap is getting there a little bit. And then the other side of it all is just that there is the start of a groundswell of talent, I think. It kind of felt like we had a couple of lost years of NA talent, and that the next wave is starting to come up. And, what a natural segue into Proving Grounds, which is, we've wrapped up the first week of Proving Grounds now. And of course you can look at, players in the LCS for this. You can obviously talk about Danny, or other things with, NA talent coming in, and, other players, see what Spica has been able to do. But Proving Grounds is where kind of that next phase is coming in. And I know that you've been watching kind of the first week. What's been standing out to you so far about this tournament?
I mean, obviously Resolve doing it again.
Yeah.
That was really surprising to me, because
they beat Cloud9 Academy 2-0. Cloud9 Academy came in as finalists, so they were the seed 2 team.
Not only finalists, but you just look at this roster, right? And it's a roster that, like, specifically with King, obviously, who had LCS experience from this past split. Obviously, like, everyone knows Darshan, and then to a lesser extent Shurnfire. But if you're looking at like the bot side of this team primarily, these are players that people are looking at individually, and they're like, oh, okay, this is the next. We're gonna pick apart this team. We're gonna maybe bump up some of these players in Copy King and Isles, and that kind of a team, like, quote unquote, doesn't lose to a team like Resolve, where I think people, I mean, shout out to Scouting Grounds, because I remember one of the teams I followed was had, I believe, PCL Fnatic and Winter all on it together as a group. So it's
now
cool.
They're playing, they've got APA
cool.
and Array playing with them as well.
Together.
Make sure we shout them all out.
Yeah. So it's like, it typically a team like C9 doesn't lose to a team like Resolve only because you're looking at infrastructure and, again, the ability to play in LCS potentially for part of the season, where you are just going to learn a lot more as an individual player. And for Resolve to come out and have just a 2-0 to see, and again, like, I haven't had enough time to watch NA Amateur from any sort of analytical perspective. Like, I've watched it very casually, but like to go from like my understanding of what kind of a player like PCL, like Ornn for two straight games, and like maybe that has changed, and he's not like always shoving, carries like the Camille in the top lane, because you can correct me on that. But like, to see that kind of growth from him, I in particular really liked their comp in the second game with the Aphelios Thresh, and then the Ornn for tank, and then Trundle Syndra. I thought that comp was really good, and then obviously APA like absolutely popped off that game anyway. So this was like not the best series I watched, but this was such a interesting series if you're looking at like talent in North America that people think have like a very clear-cut set idea of like, this is who I think this player is, and they're never going to get better, and that's just the way things are, right? Like, Fnatic is another one that I feel has kind of fallen through the cracks because of his time on Optic and his time on TSM wasn't particularly... It was one of those things where he was like plugged in and not given a lot of resources in terms of support, because it was almost like an emergency situation, right? So that happens a lot in North America, where people make up their mind about a player from like one or two things, and then they just kind of are like, okay, this is how this player is always going to be, and they're never going to change. And so it was really cool, not just because I followed them at Scouting Grounds and I have a soft spot in my heart for some of these
personal
guys,
connection.
But it was also just really cool to see them kind of, I think, in my opinion, defy expectations of who people think that these players as individuals are, and to prove that you can change and grow as a player with like a lot more practice and a lot more eyes on you.
Well, and I think a big story of that series too, it's similar to other kind of, where you perceive there to be gaps between the level of play, like play-ins and so on, where, Cloud9 Academy came in and they wanted to play kind of the skill diff kind of a thing. They wanted to play the Renekton and Nidalee. They came in, they brought out a Kindred jungle in the second game, and they wanted to snowball through them and just say, hey, look how much better we are. And then Resolve came in with the kind of the more scaling kind of comps, like the Ornn picks in top lane got destroyed, but they, shutting down an Ornn, okay, well, he's still Ornn later on. You can still play the team fights well and so on. And that's kind of what happened. I think when I looked at the stats from that, the early game rating from those two games was about 86 for Cloud9. So 15 minutes in, they were 86% on average probable to win.
Makes sense.
And lost both of those. So, it's one of those like, okay, even if you are the better team in individual player skill and so on, you still have to make the right calls and like play out your comp at a good level, because the team that had an easier comp to execute and then played it to a good level can take those games off you, which is exactly what Resolve did. I think they had smarter and simpler team comps and executed them well. Good Trundle pillars and good team fighting positioning. Cloud9 not executing clean snowballs. Like I was really annoyed with some of their early dragon priority in top lane turret killing herald snowballing type comps, and they're like, oh no, we gotta go control these early dragons if we can contest those. So it just goes to show, like, even if you are quote unquote the better team, you still have to play better. You can't just kind of sleepwalk away through it. Which is, I'm not trying to take credit away from Resolve for that. I think they definitely earned it. And Array had some really good team fighting in particular, I thought. But, of course, there were several other matches. There were 8 matches to start out that first round. The one that really stood out to me, and I think you agree on this one, I think the best match of that first round was Evil Geniuses Academy against Golden Guardians Academy. Went the full 3 games, really closely contested, very entertaining. Do you agree on that one?
Yeah. The other one I was looking at, but we were talking off camera about this. The other one I was looking at that was really interesting to me was the FlyQuest Zoos series, just because.
Another 2-1.
Yeah, both of these teams are really interesting because of the players on them, but also because it's been. I keep repeating the word interesting, but it's been cool to watch how and what FlyQuest Academy learned from their time in LCS. And so that series in particular was pretty interesting to me. Obviously, I think Zoos really want that back because there were several times where I definitely think that they should have taken the series, and that's kind of been this FlyQuest Academy team's MO, right? Is that even if they lose out early or if they make a lot of mistakes in early laning and get really set back really far behind, they're going to try to pick fights to get back into it. It's something I've always appreciated about this team, and something you could kind of see within this series as well. But in terms of like actual gameplay, EGA versus GGA was better. I just wanted to shout out that series as well because it's a really entertaining one to watch. Like if you just want, again, a lot of team fighting. Obviously, I just mentioned there were a lot of mistakes as well, so keep that in mind. But you
got Alorum on Urgot in Game 3, and he did well, even though he couldn't manage to win it. But it's always fun to see Alorum bring out his Urgot. It was banned against him in other games.
Yeah, he brought out the Urgot. He brought out the Poppy. It's he always has some really interesting top lane picks into certain matchups. But yeah, EGA versus GGA was the best played series in my opinion, and it's also, I think, above all, and you'd probably agree with this given a lot of your like NA players to watch series or like people who impressed you, right? Is that these are 2 teams that people should be looking at if you want to think about like who might possibly get picked up and looked at to be maybe someone who could play in LCS.
Yeah, I think like on the Golden Guardian side, you have Prismal, who I think has been knocking on the door for a little bit. And I think will be a very interesting story for Golden Guardians, whether they decide next year is the year, whether they think Prismal is, could grow into a better player than Stixxay and want to go that route or not. And obviously Niles playing there, and, can he kind of get back and work his way in there? And then on the other side, you've got Jojo Pian, who I've said multiple times now, I think has the highest potential of any NA player or any rookie right now. And he had a great series. You also have Tony Top, who I think is a very interesting player to watch. And they just, Tomio coming in as kind of the late season addition on the academy level after playing for UG Prodigies for a long time. Very interesting there. What the stack of young talent on both sides for sure. But yeah, but I think the biggest story of the series was Jojo and what he managed to do, which. I mean, I mentioned this a little bit when I did Academy Standouts for the week and put that out, but I think one of the big stories of JoJo is the fact that he has become the primary shot caller for EGA. So you look at what he did individually on the LeBlanc and on the Sylas and, racking up 13 kills in a Sylas game and just destroying that game. But then also you look at game 1 and go, okay, EGA kind of fumbled that one a little bit. They were playing kind of a 1-3-1-ish comp, like very side lane active, and then they just got drawn into 5v5s that they shouldn't have really been taking, and you go, okay, JoJo shot calling, don't know for sure if that's from him or if that's, something going on with the team as a whole, but like, okay, there's obviously some room there. And that's something that makes evaluating him as a young player really interesting and kind of difficult in some ways is, what would he look like if he had a different player, maybe a more veteran player, shot calling instead of him, and or is this something that he's kind of wearing some training weights in a way, right?
Yeah, that, and I think the other player who impressed me a little bit more quietly, I'll say, is Tomio, because for JoJo to be able to, I mean, like, it's really difficult for me to separate mid jungle
Sure.
analytically. If you're looking at one, you kind of have to look at the other, because that's the lane that has the most
Yeah.
impact on what a jungler can do.
Hmm.
And vice versa, whatever the jungler is doing is going to impact the mid laner typically a lot more, because mid is such an important control point on the map.
Yeah.
And I was surprised at how well they seem to be communicating with, again, such like comparatively little time together. People told me going into this to watch out for Tomio, because he was this could be like a breakout tournament for him,
Hmm.
since coming up from EGP and having to fill the shoes of contracts when he got called up to be part of the EG 6-man roster.
Yeah.
So I was pretty impressed with him in this series as well. I still think obviously he has a lot of room to grow,
Hmm.
but their communication seems to be surprisingly good. And I don't know if that's also because JoJo, especially in the latter two games, had a lot more like mid prio and control, which is also going to impact, again, like just how much you're going to be able to,
Yeah.
do stuff as a jungler. But I also am really on the lookout for Tomio as well, and I want to see how he develops and evolves as a player throughout this series,
Yeah.
because again, this is only his second tournament with the team, right? Since he stepped in
Yeah.
the
He
academy
came in for
playoffs.
playoffs.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then for this, yeah, I mean, so I've talked about before, when I'm watching Academy or amateur, but especially in Academy, I tend to kind of uh, take notes on which players I think are performing the best and at which level, and I kind of give them a bit of like almost a 3-star rating kind of a system. So I thought the players who play like really really well, I'll give them a 1. Players who I thought were pretty good, but a few kind of issues or just mistakes, I give them a 2, and then a 3 if I think there were some good things, a little more on the average level. So like in that series, I gave JoJo a 2 for game 1, and then 1s for games 2 and 3. Tomio, I gave a 3, a 2, and a 1, which is pretty good. Not quite enough to break into like Academy standouts, honorable mention kind of a thing, but close. And I thought he got better as the series went on, and definitely is a player that has the skill to get there, but obviously just needs to learn what's it like to jungle at the pro level, right? What are the subtleties of the role? And yeah, I think as the tournament goes on, especially with, and I think we saw this in spring as well, not just with EG, but with other teams, once their LCS team is out of the playoffs, and that coaching staff gets freed up, and then they start helping out the academy team, and I think sometimes you can see a big acceleration of growth there, and that's been going on with EG, right? So, and again with some other teams as well. So I think that always is a big opportunity for a player like Tomio to take a big step in their development. Just as kind of a final kind of takeaway from this, and it kind of transitions a little bit, but what do you think of kind of the different choices by the 3 NA Worlds teams about what they're doing with their sub roles? Because obviously 100 Thieves have brought Kenvi and Tenacity, who are 2 of what I consider the top 5 NA prospects right now, and they're bringing them to Worlds as subs. They're not competing in Proving Grounds. But both Team Liquid and Cloud9 are fielding their full academy rosters and did not bring any of those players as subs. Maybe they'll do it later once Proving Grounds is over, and maybe they'll fly them in then. I think there's some speculation about that, but what do you think about those different kind of approaches to this?
So my question is, because grand finals are the 26th, which would be way too late. I would assume
with quarantines and stuff.
Most teams, I would assume most teams are leaving within the next week. Is it possible? So like, are rosters automatically? Because I feel like Worlds rosters are more. They're going to be more strict on those than Proving Grounds rosters. I guess what I'm asking you is that would it be possible for them to just be playing their subs in the first week and a half, 2 weeks, and then pull them, or is that not feasible?
So I believe, and I should check on this. I believe you're able to obviously declare subs for your Proving Grounds roster, right? You had to declare your starting 5. I think there's only 1 sub per team. There might be room for 2. And I'm gonna check on that. But if I look at I think there's only room for 1 sub for Proving Grounds. So you could do that with 1 player, right? And we know like TLA has used Dokla in the playoffs, for example. So they could maybe halfway through the tournament, if they're still, working on it, they could maybe pull Jenkins, play Dokla, send Jenkins to Europe, something like that. But I don't think they could do it with 2 players because I don't think they had the chance to declare 2 subs.
Yeah. So with it, I'll say this: I think it definitely makes sense for 100 Thieves. I also think that obviously this 100 Thieves lineup, you're not necessarily looking at them substituting in, but again, it will be good practice, and it also allows you to do certain things in scrims as you're trying to improve and look at different meta shifts and stuff like that. And it's a nice like failsafe. So it makes sense to me that 100 Thieves, for as much as people like have been, absolutely battering this org for having like, no NA talent on their qualifying roster. I don't think you can actually argue that 100 Thieves haven't spent a lot of time and investment into amateur and academy. So I'm glad that they're bringing those substitutes. And then obviously moving Kamsu and Chad up. It was interesting to watch them. I mean, Kamsu I've followed since he was a League player, but then I also followed him in Overwatch, and then now he's back in League, which is so interesting. But for TL and C9, I'm less surprised about C9 because I think this is definitely a team who, even with their King substitutions in the beginning, was like, we know what our starting 5 is going to eventually be. We're going with the same lineup. It's this lineup, and it doesn't surprise me as much. But for Team Liquid, it's a bit surprising only because they have had a few issues over the course of the season with, players taking time off. Most specifically, I would say Santorin, who had to take time off due to his health issues, and not having Armeo as a backup tells me that they're really, really confident that he's definitely worked out and can mitigate whatever has been ailing him, even with stuff like traveling and being in a different environment. And I think one of the things that probably helps there is that TL do have a facility in Europe, if I'm not mistaken. So they do, they should have like pretty good resources and connections over there. It's not in Germany though.
No, it's in the Netherlands, I assume.
Netherlands, yeah. So I would assume that they would be drawing on that as well to have like a strong infrastructure when going over to Europe initially during their quarantine period. But so, I mean, it just tells me that they're, again, if they hadn't had issues and substitutions throughout the season, I would be less surprised because obviously this is the starting lineup you want, right? Like the Alfari, Santorin, Jensen Tactical Core roster is the roster that you absolutely want for TL to be attending international events. The only thing that's surprising is, given all of their issues, they seem to be incredibly confident that this is the team that they want to send, is what that's telling me. Like, they're like, we have it solved. We'll be able to give Santorin any and all help he needs. And I'm not even saying that his health has been bad lately, because I don't think it has. It's more that, like, it can be affected by a lot of stuff, right? Like, and again, traveling is one of those things that really disrupts your schedule physically and mentally. So
I think there are a couple different points on it as well. Is that if assuming that TL aren't planning to fly Armeo out and pull him out of scouting grounds, I don't think Inori is eligible as a sub for Proving Grounds for what it's worth. But But I don't know, maybe he is, and I misunderstood that. But they also potentially could declare cold. He's been a pro jungler, and if he's been playing solo queue as just like an emergency sub, right? But I think also, if you look at what Santorin has said about his appearing in the playoffs and all that, and how he felt he might only be at 80 or 85% capacity, and yet TL looked a lot better. Maybe they feel like as long as Santorin can play, even if he's not feeling great, we think this is actually going to give us our best chance anyways. They might be taking that approach on it too. And I do think that Team Liquid looked a lot better with him back in. And on the Cloud9 front, they also have, ex-pros or high level players in their coaching staff that maybe they feel they have that like absolute emergency kind of backup potential there. I don't know. It's a little bit of a weird approach on it, but having Mithy and having Max Waldo and people like that who have, obviously competed at that level before, we'll have to see what happens with them. I think to me, the really interesting kind of reading between the lines on it all philosophically is that if you have players in your academy team that you think you have a potential to bring up to LCS next year, you're going to want to bring them along to help them develop, give them that learning experience, give them the US solo queue, more time with your LCS coaches, just around them and absorbing from the pro environment. I think that gives you, that gives you more chance. And that's why I would look at 100 Thieves bringing Kenvi and Tenacity and say, okay, they're looking at these guys as players that they want to retain for the long term, so bringing them along is a no-brainer. They're going to get more out of this than they would out of playing in Proving Grounds. But I personally think leaving the players behind to play in Proving Grounds gives you a little bit more ammunition to try to move those players in the offseason, if that's what you want to do. Because playing solo queue in EU West is not going to really increase their sale value, probably, compared to if they go out and win Proving Grounds, which, obviously that's what you're going to aim for. That could potentially give you that much, another bullet in your in your ammo of here's why you should pay us more for this player if you want them. So I think that does have some potentially interesting implications for 100 Thieves' plans with Kenvi and Tenacity, and for TL's plans with Ayla or C9 with Isles, or players like this that could be competing in the LCS. I think are probably good enough to break in next year. So we'll have to see. I mean, that's just speculation, reading between the lines on them, but I like to be an armchair GM, and that's the hat I'm putting on when I'm evaluating that. And 100 Thieves, of course, are the most interesting team from that perspective. So we'll have to see. We'll have to see how all that plays out, and of course the way they perform at Worlds. If they bomb out, then maybe you say, even if we want LCS, maybe it is time to say, maybe we will sell closer and promote Kenvi or something like that, right? Well, but if they win, then that's a different, if they get to semis or something, maybe it's a different approach. We will see. Let's wrap up with a couple of listener questions here, and these were both submitted on patreon.com/oracleselixir, so you can check that out if you haven't looked at it before. So Brandon Brobst mentioned that he's really excited about the Game Changers event that was announced that's coming up later this month, and he's wondering what you think of it, Emily.
So I think it's awesome because the problem with anything that is really massive and societal is getting it down to a nitty-gritty individual level, right?
Well, and maybe we should give some context on what this actually is.
Yeah,
for people who don't
know. So for those that don't know, let me pull up the article because I just want to make sure I have the.
Yeah. So I mean,
I'm just gonna pull up the LOL Esports announcement. Here we go. Yeah. So for people that don't know, Game Changers is basically, as the article pulls up, it's trying to promote women who make it to high elo to give them better resources to transition into being in amateur and then hopefully eventually professional leagues. And the goal of it is to just make the path a little bit more palatable and achievable for women in the LOL esports space in North America. So I'll just read here's what I wanted. Okay. So 10 women will be selected to field 2 teams over 2 weeks. These players will experience life as a pro playing daily scrims. They'll have positional coaching, analyst VOD reviews, expert panels. So basically it's like a scouting it's like a souped up scouting grounds, but for women of 13 years or older in the US and in Canada. So sorry, I should have led with that. I'm glad I pulled up the details for it. And this starts, player applications are open. The selection should have already been done, right? Yeah, September 3rd. Yeah. And then the event starts on the 27th. So I think the big thing for me is, again, like when you have a thing that's affected by like numerous societal factors, it's really hard to get people to understand what that looks like on like an individual level, because everything is so like broad and nebulous and multifaceted. So bringing it down to like a very actionable thing where you're, you know, pulling high elo women and giving them all of these resources is, in my opinion, like very cool. And it's something that I think Riot has probably had in the works for a little while in terms of just trying to figure out like, how do we begin to tackle this problem that, again, has like so many different facets to it. So I think it's really great. Like I'm really, really happy that they're doing it, and I hope it works out well.
Yeah, I think it's hopefully something that gets, I've seen a lot of positive reception in the community around it, which is great. I think there's, you know, obviously some parts of it that you hope go well and have a little bit of hesitance about, like in the community reception to it, like the fact that they're not going to broadcast any of the actual competitive parts of it live because they're concerned about, you know, and for good reason, I think, concerned about what Twitch chat might look like and stuff like that, which, I mean, if you still don't think that there are issues around this and reasons to have events like this, I mean, you just look at that and go, okay, yeah, this is why these events are needed. And I hope that it's a really big step forward in a positive way. So yeah, I'm really excited for it. I hope it works out well, and I hope we get to see these kind of incremental positive changes and things moving forward on that. So I'm not sure exactly what the public facing content on it is going to look like, whether there will be casted VODs or stuff. I hope there will be. But either way, I mean, it's not really for, I don't think it's so much for the audience as it's for the participants, right? So
yeah, it's definitely for the participants. I do hope that they do release some VODs that can be cast over or something, only because, and again, like it kind of sucks sometimes to be a woman in the esports space. Like, I'll just say that. But I also do think that, similar to how we talk about like amateur, right, and academy, a lot of the improvements that have been made, albeit slowly, over the past year have been because people have been able to get more eyeballs on some of these players, right? Yep. So even though you have someone being like, that, you know, like that play was incredibly terrible and like you're really bad, and that's always going to happen, and that will happen even more if it's high elo women playing, probably. I do think that the importance of getting VODs out there and gameplay out there is also like, yes, people are going to be shitty about it, but that's still a really important part of the process of getting more people to look at it and more people to take it seriously. So I do hope that at some point we get casted VODs or something like that, because I think it's an important part of the process.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll wrap up with one other question from Alexander Wu, who I'll paraphrase a bit, is basically wondering what spurred the change on the LCS broadcast to have the analysts covering pick and ban instead of the casters, because he thought it was a good change and really appreciated it.
We wanted to.
Yeah.
We wanted to. But also, so what happened in kind of, we were trying out a lot of different things because of how features was taking up all of the countdown time, like in testing it throughout the regular season and the postseason. And so especially in the postseason with the truncated time, we felt like we didn't have a lot of time to go into some of the narrative storylines, and you know, some of that stuff can be done in pick ban, especially when you know, the first round of bans is like it gets to be like pretty predictable depending on what teams are playing. So it was twofold. One, we just want to do it. Like, if you ask me, like, oh, do you want to cover pick ban? I'm always going to say yes, because draft is just a really fascinating and important part of League of Legends, and I like to talk about it. But on top of that, you can weave in certain narratives, especially during quote unquote a small amount of downtime during the initial round of bans in particular, and some even to some extent some of the first picks, because some of them are pretty obvious and you don't necessarily always have to explain to viewers, like, here's the Xin Zhao Viego trade again, like that doesn't necessarily need a lot of in-depth, fascinating analysis until the actual team compositions come. So it gives you a little bit more time to talk about maybe some of the narratives with these teams, or even just from a more analytical perspective, some of the things that these players have been performing really well on and how that compares to other leagues and that kind of stuff. So it basically just gives us a little bit more time, so we can make up a bit more time without since we didn't have the spacing countdown, basically. So we kind of bugged producers about it, and they let us have it.
Yeah, and it worked out well. I saw a lot of good reception to it. So yeah, I think that was a good change. That I'm curious what they'll do for flow at different things at Worlds, when you get kind of cross pollination between different broadcasts and so on. But yeah, we'll see. Maybe they'll bring it in there.
I actually think I was really bad in pick ban a lot of the time, because I get like too focused and I forget to talk.
Yeah. 3 more picks have happened in the meantime.
Watching it, and I'm just like, what does this mean? And I'll just be thinking in my head and not say it out loud. And I need to learn how to say it out loud.
Sure. Yeah, that's always a challenge. Cool. Well, thank you to Brandon and Alexander for sending in those questions. And thank you to everyone who tuned in, and to Emily for joining on the show today. We've you mentioned off the top of the show some of the content or coverage you have coming up, but when should we expect that, and where can we find it?
So you can find it on my Twitter at League of Emily, because I'll probably tweet it out, even though I haven't been using Twitter as much because I am lazy and also social media scares me. But I am not sure where I'll post. Probably on my Medium blog, which is a dumping ground of all sorts of random stuff. And then hopefully I'll be doing stuff during Worlds as well. I'm not sure where or in what capacity, but I will be covering it somehow.
All right. Well, we'll watch your Twitter, and we'll find out about it that way, one way or another. And again, thanks to everyone who tuned in live or is watching this later. You can support the TrueSight podcast at patreon.com/OraclesElixir. You can subscribe to the show on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts, as well as other platforms, and find them all through anchor.fm/TrueSight. And make sure you check out the Oracle's Elixir Discord server to talk about League of Legends esports, data science, today about how big different media franchises are in relation to one another, and a lot of other topics. Links for all those things will be in the show notes. This has been the TrueSight podcast, and I'm Tim Sevenhuisen. Thanks for listening.